Well, welcome to another Friday night. We've gone through this series of understanding trauma, and it always leads to this such an important question of, okay, you've diagnosed it, you've explained it, you've helped us see how it's messed us up big time, but how do we heal from it? And that's what I want to focus on this time and next. A lot of it we've covered already with each of the talks. We've talked about different healing pieces to it, but I just want to pull it all together today and give you an overview of the healing from trauma. And I hope it's helpful. I hope it points the way forward for you. Let me begin by just reading some quotes. So it says to not deal with trauma is to be at war with yourself. To hide deep pain takes an enormous amount of energy. And I love that because what it's saying is if you don't deal with your trauma, you might think, oh, it's not going to bother me. Yeah, you're going to be at war with yourself. It is going to affect you, and it takes a lot of energy to suppress all of that stuff. Peter Levine has written, trauma is a fact of life, but it does not have to be a life sentence. And I think that's so important to hear. He's also said trauma must be regarded as a virus that can still be triggered years later. And when it's triggered, it produces unhealthy responses if we don't heal from it. And so to me, people can avoid the healing journey. People can try to find shortcuts that don't work, but eventually you have to face the fact I need to heal. This is going to take some work, but I got to go there. And that's where I hope you are at. What I think is so important to say right up front is this. The trauma healing journey is different from the current medical model of healing. And I think it's important to understand this because this really messes people up. They go into trauma thinking that they're going to heal in the same way they would heal with the medical model. So what is the current medical model? Well, you feel a sore throat, or you get a cut, or you have something wrong with your kidneys. So you go to the doctor, you get diagnosed, and then they give you surgery, a medication, or therapy, and basically say, okay, we're going to do these steps. And it's kind of these basic steps that they're going to do. And it's a linear approach. So do step 1, step 2, step 3, and it follows a straight line, and you see constant improvement. And it's a fairly short line. That within 6 to 12 weeks, you're going to be feeling a whole lot better, or the problem's going to be gone. And so that's the current medical model. That is not how complex trauma works. And so many people come in expecting that, and then they get disappointed when it doesn't happen that way, and they think either it's a bad program or I'm doing something wrong. And no, it's the model for healing trauma is totally different. And so there's 3 phases to the trauma recovery model. So number 1, before a person can heal from trauma at all, they have to feel safe. People can only heal in an environment of safety. And so the first thing that I need to do when I'm working with a client is to provide safety for them. That means I have to be a safe person, and I need to provide a safe environment. Now, for people coming out of trauma, that's going to take a while before they feel safe sometimes. And so that could be several weeks or months before they start to feel safe. Secondly, once they feel safe, then you go to reprocessing the trauma. And we're going to come back to that. And then thirdly, once they've reprocessed the trauma and healed from it, then they can move on with life. But here's where it gets tricky. So let's go back to the safety. So safety includes they got to get stabilized so that they're able to regulate themselves when they get triggered. So they get triggered, their emotions escalate, they go 0 to 100 in a nanosecond, and they need to be able to regulate that. They need to find a safe environment, a safe therapist. They needed boundaries with family so they're not still in abuse in the trauma environment. And so that becomes the first step, and that's going to take a while. But then let's go to this reprocessing traumatic memories. This has been badly misunderstood, sadly. Because what a lot of people have said is, oh, this is unnecessary. All you're doing is taking them back to their memories as if there's value in taking them back to their memories, and you're just re-traumatizing them. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're not taking them back to their memories as if that in itself is all they need to just relive that memory. No, we're taking them back so they can reprocess it. So the first time they went through as a helpless child with nobody supporting them. They had no tools and no supports. And so because of that, they saw it from the small child's eyes. Now, when we take them back, we want them to realize they're not that small child anymore. They now have tools, they now have support, and they're able to see it from a different perspective. They're able to now process it to resolve it. And that's where the healing happens. And so what you can see, though, is when you take a person back and they start to process that memory, all of a sudden, they don't feel safe again. It's bringing back all the old emotions. And so they go back, you got to reestablish safety. So you go back to phase one until they feel safe again. And then they reprocess and heal and they move on. But then the next one, memory they have, they start reprocessing that, they don't feel safe. So you got to go back to phase one and get them to feel safe again. And so that part begins to happen. And so how long does it take to reprocess the traumatic memories? For some people, that's going to take months, even years to do all of that. But then you get to a point where they've grown and healed enough, and now they can kind of go back into adding responsibilities to their life, beginning to live a fuller life, doing kind of what normal, healthy people do. So they start to move on with this new set of tools, with this support network, and it's a wonderful time for them. But what happens as they go now into adding responsibilities to life, as to expanding their life, they get triggered. They add in more stresses, and more stress begins to cause their brain to think, oh, this is getting unsafe, and they go back to trauma responses. So moving on with life takes them to a new phase, which is wonderful, but it results in new triggers. It results in new stresses. And what does that do? It takes them back to not feeling safe. It takes their brain back to go, I got to go back to old tools to survival mode. And so all of a sudden you're back to phase one again. And you're going, let's get safe. Okay, let's process what's going on here, phase two. And then they do deeper healing. And then they can move on again. So that moving on phase keeps taking them back to phase one and phase two. And they heal, move on some more, takes them back to phase one, phase two. So what does this journey then look like? It's not a straight line that's constantly moving upward. It's a line that's going up and down, back, forth, up, down, back, forth. It's slow, it's messy. It is not like the medical model. And that is so important to understand. The journey of healing from trauma is not a simple, clean, and tidy journey. It is a messy, slow, often frustrating process where you feel like you're regressing at times, but you keep going at it. And over time, you begin to realize, wow, I have grown. I'm not where I was before. So let me take that to the next aspect that needs to be considered when we look at healing. I tell people there's 5 components to the recovery journey. So the first is education, and this is a huge part of it. Over 90% of what a person coming out of complex trauma does in their life, in their daily life, is based on their subconscious programming. How they respond, how they think, how they feel, all old programs that have been there for years and they're not even aware of it. And so a huge part of the healing journey is growing in self-awareness, becoming aware of these subconscious programs, bringing them to the conscious level. And so that means becoming aware of wounds, becoming aware of their main issues, becoming aware of their triggers, becoming aware of the patterns that take place once they are triggered. And that's a huge amount of this learning journey, education journey. And we do a ton of that in LIT. But then the question becomes, okay, I know what unhealthy looks like. I've been using an unhealthy toolbox for years. What does healthy look like? And what do healthy tools look like? And so that's an education part of the journey. Because if I'm going to change and cope and be healthy, I got to learn all of that stuff. And then how do I parent myself? I didn't get healthy parenting, so my role models for parenting growing up are lacking. I have to parent myself now, but I don't know what healthy parenting looks like. So I need to learn what healthy parenting looks like. So there's just education. Education is such an important part of this journey. But then there's that reprocessing that we talked about, therapy. You need a safe therapist who can help you go to those wounds, reprocess them, heal them, help you learn to parent yourself, your inner child, that wounded child within you. That's an important part of the healing journey. Thirdly, you need a healthy support network. And that really has two things. You can't do this alone. You need supports. But for many people, their biological family is not the healthiest, safest support network. Often it's toxic. And so you have to create a surrogate family, a safe community, other people on the journey who understand this, and spend time with them so that you are growing in a community and supporting each other and helping each other. So important. And then part of that network is having regular activities where you can come together with other people on the journey and be reminded of important truths, support each other, accept and love each other. All of that becomes important. And then with that, you have to learn to set boundaries with unhealthy people so that they don't keep dragging you down and pulling you back to old behaviors. So that healthy support network is such an important part of this journey. So let me just add a piece based on that. What I want you to see there is there's two types of kind of relationship things happening. There's a therapist and there's a support surrogate family. A lot of people in the past, using the medical model, have just thought the way to heal trauma is send them to a counselor once a week for an hour, and that should heal their trauma. I hope you realize that that's probably not going to be enough. That's going to give them some academic information and some tools, but they need to be able to apply those tools in a safe place with safe people so that they begin to have that family community where they can learn to live and use the tools. So this is such an important thing. You got to blend both the community, but then you need the therapist that helps you dig into your issues, your unique challenges, and heal and learn tools for that. The fourth component of recovery is healthy relationships. So you have this community, this support network, and those are going to be important relationships, but you need to develop some closer connection with one or two or three or four people. The tragedy of complex trauma is that a child can form secure attachment. And so what is so important to understand in recovery is you can't heal it with information alone. You also need to create secure attachment. You need to have true healthy connection with some people. That's where the deepest wounds get healed. Now, I'm not talking romantic connection. I'm talking about healthy, secure attachment. That becomes such an important part of recovery. And then the fifth area is learning to manage triggers. So for most people, they get all this information, they start make changes in their life, they start to grow, and it's looking great, and they're doing really well. But where they really fall apart, where the damage gets done, is when they get triggered. And then all of a sudden they go to their limbic brain, they're lashing out, their emotions are dysregulated. And that's when they hurt their kids, that's when they hurt their loved ones, that's when they make bad decisions. And so if they don't learn practical tools to manage and regulate their emotions at those times when they're triggered, they'll just keep doing damage. That is so hard, to learn the tools to manage emotions when you're triggered. And so it's a key but difficult part of this journey for people. The next thing I want people to realize when they enter into this recovery journey and begin to heal is that you're really going to be healing on two different levels. The first level is you're going to be going back to your past and looking at those wounds that started all of the problems for you that you weren't able to resolve as a child and heal from. And the healing is going to take place there. And that's going to be quite intense in the initial part of the journey, but that's definitely going to be a big part of the initial part of the journey. But there's a second level, and that is you still have daily life going on. You're still dealing with problems at home, with children, with partner, with friends, with family, with work. And there's stresses, there's conflict, there's different things that come up that you just don't have the tools to handle. And so it's the very practical, healthy living tools that you never learned as a child, but now you need to learn in order to deal with life in a healthy way and not go back to some of the old tools. And so that's such an important part of learning too. And so a lot of people that offer programs for people with trauma often just focus on the second part and say, oh, we're just going to teach you the tools to live a healthy life. But they don't provide the first part, the healing. And so the person just keeps getting triggered and they go back to old tools. They can't stop themselves and they do all kinds of damage. Others just say, well, let's just focus on the healing part, and they don't give you the practical tools. That doesn't work as well as it should either. And so you need both levels of healing in order to have complete healing take place. Over the years, what I've begun to realize is people kind of make common mistakes when it comes to recovery. They have expectations about the healing journey that aren't necessarily realistic. So probably the most common one is that people, without even realizing it, come into recovery wanting a magic fix or a quick fix. They want you to just go through this course and they'll, within 2-3 months, they'll be all better. That is not realistic. Or they want recovery that bypasses having to deal with any painful emotions. Just give me information. I don't want to have to deal with that painful emotional stuff. Emotions are bad. I don't like emotions. I just like facts. And so they want something that's just academic only. They want to bypass dealing with emotions. The next one that is so common for people is they do, without realizing it, kind of have this expectation that recovery should be done within a few months, at most a year. So it's a completion date in their mind as to when recovery will be over. And so they go into this, and after a year, they realize they're still struggling with stuff, and they still are only scratching the surface on some things, and they just begin to get discouraged. Realize this is a long, long journey. You're going to see a lot of growth in the first year that's going to make it worth it, but there's still a lot more that needs to be done. The next common thing is so many people come into treatment or into counseling because they're in a current crisis. Their partner and them have just had a terrible fight. Their partner's threatening to leave them unless they get help. And so they come in and they go, I need help. But what they're really saying is, I want to fix the current crisis so my partner doesn't leave me. Just give me the tools to handle conflict. Just give me the tools to handle my wife's moods. What I want to do with them is to go, yes, we're going to work on those things, but I want you to begin to look at what are the deeper issues that cause the conflict, that cause the ways that you handle conflict, that cause some of the moods and emotional dysregulation. A lot of people go, I don't want to go there, just give me tools. What you have to realize is a lot of people start recovery for a crisis. But if they're going to actually succeed in recovery, they got to go to the deep issues. If they only stay at trying to fix a crisis, they might get a short-term solution, but it's just going to come up again because they've never dealt with the deep issues. It is such an important part of this. The next one is, so many people come to me and they go, just give me the tools. There's got to be at least 2 or 3 tools that you can give me that'll just kind of fix all of my problems right now. Recovery is tools, but recovery is healing deep stuff, changing core beliefs, core issues. There's not just quick magic tools that fix that. So always understand, yes, there are tools, those come later usually. It's the deep stuff that you have to really deal with, or else the tools will never work. Now, one of the things that's sometimes helpful for people is to have some metaphors or analogies of recovery that will help them in this healing journey. So the thought of people going back to deal with trauma is a scary, scary thing. To them, they're opening a can of worms that they're afraid is going to be overwhelming. So sometimes an illustration like watching a child that's going to watch a scary movie, and they know it's going to be scary, and they're really, I don't know if I want to do this. But then what you can do is go, have you ever watched another movie that was scary at first? Yes. Yeah, it was really terrifying. But did you watch it a second time? Yes. Was it as scary? No, because I kind of knew it was coming, and I knew kind of how it would turn out. Did you watch it a third time and a fourth time? And what they begin to realize is, okay, as I processed that movie, each time it got easier. Each time it was less scary. And so that's going to be similar to when you're reprocessing trauma. It's not going to have the same effect every time you're working through it. Another one is similar to that, is kind of like the roller coaster. The child going to the roller coaster for the first time, they see the huge drop, they hear people screaming, it just looks terrifying to them. They get on it, and it is terrifying, but it's also kind of exciting. And so they go back and they want to do it again. Each time they go on that roller coaster, the terror part decreases, but the fun part increases. And that's the same with dealing with trauma. It's like a roller coaster, terrifying at first, but as you get doing it, it becomes less and less terrifying. A third analogy is, let's say you see blue smoke coming out of the exhaust of your car. And so you go to the service station and you say, could you just stop the blue smoke from coming out? And your thinking is, he's going to wave some magic wand or do some little quick fix that's just going to make blue smoke stop coming out of the car. But the mechanic says, oh, sure, I can do that, but I'm going to have to overhaul your engine. And you go, whoa, no, there's got to be a quick fix just to stop the blue smoke. And they go, no, this is going to require an engine overhaul. That's the same when you got blue smoke coming out in your daily life that's starting to mess up your relationships. You need an engine overhaul. Another example that's helpful is, so a lot of people look at this recovery journey and they see other people who are kind of experiencing the results of the journey at the end. So they see their they got their families back, their kids are getting healthy, their relationships are meaningful, healthy attachment, good job, they've got joy again in their life, and they go, yeah, I want that, I want that. But then they start the journey and they go, this is a lot of hard work and pain. I'm not sure it's worth it. And so an illustration that sometimes can help is that of an athlete. And so if it's with somebody and they love sports, pick their favorite athlete who's won, let's say, a Super Bowl or some other great award in sports. And what you do with them is say, think about the amount of hours they had to practice to become good at basketball or football. Hours over years. Think of the early mornings. Think of the discipline. Think of the days they had to do it and they didn't feel like it. Think of the pain that they went through at times. Think of the focus they had to have. Think of the things they had to say no to that they couldn't allow into their life. That was a lot of hard work over a lot of years. Work that others weren't willing to put in. But they did. And as a result, they won the trophy. That's what recovery is. It's a lot of hard work for a lot of time, but it is worth it if you do it. Another one that I use sometimes with people is, again, people will say, just help me be a great husband, help me to be a great father. Like, give me 3 easy steps to be a great husband and a great father. And I go, that would be like a child coming to me saying, I want to be the president of Disney now. Give me 3 easy steps so I can be the president of Disney now. And I go, I could teach you a lot of stuff about administration. I could teach you a lot of stuff about managing people. Good tools, useful tools. But they wouldn't really matter unless you had years of growing internally, unless you had years of maturing, of becoming a stronger, healthy person. And so there's tools, yes, but there's internal growth. That's the biggest part of becoming effective. And that's the same with fathering. That's the same with being a partner. So I'm going to teach you tools, but you have to accept the slow process of gradual maturity. Another example, cleaning out a wound. So a person falls off their bike, gets a terrible bunch of cuts on their legs and elbows, and all they want to do is put a Band-Aid on it. They don't want anything that would hurt to help clean it out. And so they put a Band-Aid on it and it gets infected, it gets worse, it starts to spread. And so at some point they realize, if I am going to heal this wound properly, there's no easy way to do it. I gotta clean it out. That's going to be painful. It might now even need some surgery, but it is going to require it's going to require some cleaning out, some pain, and then a long healing process. One final illustration that is so important, and this is often for people who are helping somebody who has trauma, and they're a friend or a coach or a therapist. Babette Rothschild compares a person with trauma to kind of a 2-liter Coke bottle that you shake. And so the whole thing is that trauma inside the nervous system is building pressure because it isn't being resolved. And you're just adding more and more stresses to it. And it's like shaking a Coke bottle. And so now often when a person comes into therapy, what begins to happen is they want to screw the lid off that Coke bottle and just release all this pressure. But that could be actually dangerous for them. That would be an explosion. And so the friend and the therapist, they sometimes just have to unscrew the cap a little bit, let a little bit of pressure out and say, that's enough for today. We're going to come back to that tomorrow or next week, and we'll take off the cap again for a little bit. And so you have to very slowly release the pressure, is the point. Because to release it all at once would actually do a whole lot of damage. Now, let me go to a big picture of this healing journey. I think the simplest way to say what is the healing recovery journey from trauma, it is basically saying it's the process of learning to meet all 12 of my needs. That means I have to learn how to parent myself and learn how to meet all 12 of my needs. That is really what we're doing. Because what caused the trauma? Not having my needs met and not knowing how to meet those needs. And so it created trauma. And so this whole journey is about learning to parent yourself and to meet the 12 needs. But there's a lot of obstacles to doing that. And we're going to get to those in detail, but two key things to keep in mind. So the goal is connection and resiliency. The goal of this journey is trauma caused me to have to disconnect from others because they weren't safe and they kept hurting me, so I didn't have secure attachment. But then I disconnected from myself because I thought I was terrible. And so I have to connect with self and learn to connect with others. That's the goal. Secondly, to heal, I need to transform the trauma. So yes, it's a terrible negative. It did tons of damage, but I want to get to the point where not only do I heal, but I turn all of that painful stuff into skills that make me stronger, skills that enable me to help others in ways I couldn't help others before, so that I gain strength from all of that adversity. So that's the big picture goal. I just want to emphasize again the importance of this self-awareness. It is such a foundational part of the beginning of the healing journey. And it's an ongoing part of the journey because we're always getting to know new levels, new layers of ourself, of our issues. So you never get to a point where you fully know all of your issues and yourself. It's just an ongoing journey. But it begins with bringing all of this subconscious programming to the conscious level as you become aware of it. And you become aware of it when you're triggered. And all of a sudden, you respond by going, what's going on here? You're curious. And then you begin to become aware of patterns. You begin to become aware of how that affected you, of memories, of a trauma, of a wound that happened. That's one level of self-awareness. Then what you begin to realize is, okay, I'm starting to see that my triggers have themes: disrespect, made to feel stupid, when I'm neglected, when I feel rejected, when I feel abandoned, when I feel lonely. All of those are my triggers. And so, okay, let's learn from that what's going on here. Then you begin to go to learning what healthy looks like. You begin to learn your warning signs when you're drifting back into unhealthy behaviors. You begin to learn the things to do to keep yourself in a healthy place, the routine, the habits that I need every day, the practices I need every day in order to meet my 12 needs, in order to be healthy. Then I need to learn the things that motivate me, the things that demotivate me, so that I can keep doing things not just that meet my needs, but things that keep me motivated. All of that is self-awareness. All of that is so essential. So let me go to skills that are so important to learn in this, if you're going to make this journey successfully. So number one, pace yourself. So many people that come out of complex trauma end up in addiction, or they end up that their whole approach to life is you do everything 110% with great intensity. And so they come into recovery and it's all about, I'm just going to pour my life into this 110%. And they burn themselves out in recovery. And after a couple of months, they go, I'm exhausted. I can't do this anymore. And they quit. So you have to pace yourself. You have to be willing to say, okay, I can't do it all today. I can only do so much today. That's going to have to be okay. I have to go slow. Self-care is so important. You can't keep running a car when the gas tank is empty. You have to keep finding ways to fill the tank. You can't do recovery as a sprint. It's a marathon. Pace yourself. That is so, so important. Secondly, self-compassion. The old response that came out of complex trauma on how to treat yourself was a shame response where you beat yourself up, you're hard on yourself, you punish yourself, you tear yourself down, you have an inner critic that is very big. That does not work to produce lasting change. That just sends you into unhealthy behaviors. So self-compassion has 3 elements. Number 1, self-kindness, being warm and understanding towards your suffering as a child, because that child wasn't trying to be bad. That child was just trying to survive in very unjust situations. It's also being warm and understanding towards our failures, because we are going to fail. So there's no value in beating yourself up from it. Learn from it. And then being warm and understanding towards your inadequacies. We all have weaknesses. All of those things don't have to be stuff we beat ourselves up for. So that is so important. Self-compassion also must go to include understanding common humanity. Understanding that all of us suffer. I can have compassion to other people suffering. I need to have the same compassion to myself. I can see a child being treated unjustly and my heart breaks for them. I need to have that same feeling towards myself. And it's not weakness to have that feeling. So that becomes important. And then thirdly, self-compassion includes mindfulness. And so it's really, instead of overreacting to feelings, being curious about feelings. Instead of judging myself, being harsh with myself because I'm feeling certain emotions, I go, I wonder what's going on here. I'm just going to be curious about it. And so instead of going to a negative place when I feel certain emotions, I go to curiosity. That is an important part of self-compassion. Let me add a couple other things, because this is such an important concept. Self-compassion means you practice accepting the person you already are without making yourself jump through hoops to become more acceptable to your inner critic. So a lot of people think, without realizing it, I will accept myself when I get to this point. I can't accept myself now. So part of recovery is, there is a sense I don't accept where I'm at now, just like I wouldn't accept a child who's not walking, but I do accept that that's all the child is capable of doing now, and that someday they're going to learn to walk. So I accept and don't accept at the same time. The same is true in recovery. I accept that, yes, this is where I'm at. I'm not going to beat myself up. That doesn't mean I want to stay there. So I don't accept it in a sense because I want to change and grow, but I accept that this is where I'm at now. Further, your aim is to take a friendly attitude towards yourself and to know that you have your own friendship no matter what. So even if I fail, I can still be a friend to myself. I can still be supportive to myself. Another one, if you need to make changes in your behavior, you do it from a point of friendship towards yourself, not towards hostility towards you. You're a jerk. You need to change. You're terrible. Shame, shame, punishment, punishment. No, I'm changing from a friendship perspective, from a love perspective. There's another key skill that's necessary as part of this journey, and that's that emotional regulation. So, like I said, so many people can do so well in recovery until they get in intimate relationships. And that's when their deepest issues get triggered. And then they haven't got the tools to regulate themselves when they get triggered. And they just act out when they're triggered, and they can do so much damage. So 97% of their life, they're a wonderful person. They're so helpful and loving to people. 3% when they're triggered, they do a ton of damage. And they do damage to those who are closest to them, those they least want to do damage to. And so key piece in this recovery journey is learning tools to manage those emotions when I'm triggered. And you can see those are tough things. So there's really two approaches to that, which is so important to understand. It's called top down and bottom up, and it really is referring to the brain. And so the brain is a top down or bottom up. So the top is the cortex, then you have the limbic, then you have the brain stem. So top down is saying I regulate emotions through my cortex. So I develop the capacity in my thinking to think my way through stressful times, times of anxiety, times of depression. So I keep doing healthy behaviors. I keep my emotions under control. I don't act out in my anger. I manage my anger so that I'm still loving, even though I might be upset. So that's top down, is learning those thinking tools. But most people realize that there are times in your life when you are so triggered that you can't manage it with your cortex. You can't find a way through thinking to regulate that. And so that's where you use a bottom-up approach. And that's where I have to calm the brain stem in order to calm the limbic brain. And so what they have found is there are many ways to calm the brain stem, bottom-up approaches. So breathing, rhythm are key ones. So grounding exercises where you touch things, you go through your five senses, what they're experiencing. Then physical activities that calm the brain stem. And so you can think of a little infant. What calmed them? Rocking, having their back rubbed, somebody singing to them, somebody talking to them, soothing type of things, a soother. And so bottom-up approaches are activities that have a soothing effect. So art therapy, pet therapy, walking in nature, listening to music, exercising, all of those are bottom-up approaches. And so those become important to learn in this whole learning to regulate your emotions. Now with that, there's another key skill, and that is what we call distress tolerance, which another way to say that is learning to sit in uncomfortable emotions to a degree. So what happens sadly with complex trauma is at first I do fight, flight, or freeze whenever I'm in severe danger. But then it morphs, and now I start doing fight, flight, freeze whenever I'm in any uncomfortable emotion. So I won't tolerate any uncomfortable emotion, any distress. I have to learn to tolerate some distress. I have to learn to sit in emotions knowing they're not going to kill me. I am going to find a way to resolve this emotion in a healthy way, but I got to sit in it for a little while. That is such an important tool. And then we talked about triggers. And let me just give you a perspective that might help you. Understand that when you are triggered today, so your spouse rolls their eyes, let's say, you think that all of these emotions that you are feeling, which are really, really intense, are because of what your spouse just did. They rolled their eyes. Probably what's happening right now is only a small percentage of why you're reacting the way you're reacting. What's happening today is touching something very old. It's touching an old wound that is never healed. So it's like you going and touching somebody that's got a raw wound. They're going to react. They're going to go, ouch, they're going to jump, they're going to get upset. And so if you can look at triggers today and go, okay, I'm triggered. I'm not going to beat myself up that I got triggered. I'm going to go, I wonder what old wound that is touching. Because this huge response is way out of proportion to this present day wound. There's something deeper going on here. So let it point you to the wound. So somebody has said, is a trigger is simply your wounded child inside of you going, ouch. And so it is inviting you to say, let that wounded child guide you to the next area where you need to heal. So don't get down on yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Just go, thank you. This is helping me know where I need to go next. Let me add another piece to this. What happens to most people when they're triggered is they immediately go to their limbic brain. And what happens is their limbic brain goes back to the old limbic brain tools, which are survival tools. And so they go back to old behaviors. And so a lot of people feel, oh, I regressed. It's like I never learned anything. No, you just went back to your old toolbox. So what you can do is ground yourself, get into your cortex where your new toolbox is, and start using them. And so what happens in growth is, yes, you're going to have your limbic brain triggered. You can't prevent that. There might be some regression, but you can stop it, catch it, go to your new toolbox. And the more you do that, what you're going to find is when you're triggered, you're going to regress less and less. And you're going to go to your new toolbox quicker, and you're going to see growth happening. But in the initial months, you're going to find yourself going to the old toolbox, and it's going to feel like regression, but it just, no, your brain's just gone back to that old familiar place. You can stop it and get to the new one. Let me just summarize them. So what I hope you're seeing is that in recovery, in the early part of recovery, you're just learning tons of information, education about self-awareness, tools, what healthy looks like. And you're going to grow a lot through that. And it's going to be a wonderful time. But then once you kind of got the main part of the education piece done, you're going to go on with life. And your growth at that point isn't going to come from education from courses and that. It's going to come from being triggered. And the being triggered is going to point you to a wound that hasn't totally healed yet. A wound that's got another layer you didn't even know about. And so now your growth is really coming from a different point. It's coming from triggers. Well, that's not a fun part of growing. It's growing every time you get a new pain in your life. It's not as fun as just sitting in a classroom and learning. And so realize that the growth is continuing, but it just is different, and it often doesn't feel as good. There's another part in this recovery journey that's so important to be aware of, and that is the default setting. And that's that subconscious programming that we just go back to without even realizing it, when our subconscious brain, which works over 90% of the time in our decision-making processes. And so we use the illustration of learning to ride a new bike that steers the exact opposite of the old bike. So when you turn the handlebars left, you go right. You know the concept within a millisecond that, oh, okay, just change the way I turn the handlebars and then I'll steer the bike differently. But to actually implement that, when you've got years and years of riding a bike the old way, and that's now part of your subconscious programming, you can ride a bike and talk to people and look around and you just ride it. It's subconscious. To change that takes months, even years to become good at doing that, where that new program becomes your subconscious. And so what I think is so important to understand is there's something in us that just naturally gravitates back to old default settings. And so for some that's shame, some it's anger, some it's guilt, some it's anxiety, some it's depression. They just need to be in those places to feel normal. And so we need to understand that default setting that we naturally gravitate towards. And so to do that, we need those mindfulness tools where I stop several times a day and do an inventory just to see where I'm at. The other piece to me in this recovery journey to be so aware of is I need to develop tools to connect with myself, with my emotions. So like we said, is trauma is basically disconnection. I can't resolve anything and I can't connect to people. They just hurt me. So disconnect from myself, disconnect from my emotions, disconnect from others. That becomes the way of survival. But that sets up all kinds of problems. And so now to get through life and be healthy, I have to learn to connect with myself, with my emotions. And that's connecting with stuff I'm not even familiar with, stuff that's often painful and scary to me. That's connecting with people. So what I encourage people to do is, again, that mindfulness, several times a day, stopping and connecting with yourself. And then seeing, how am I doing emotionally? Where am I at with my anger? Where am I at with my stress? Where am I at with my anxiety? Where am I at with my guilt, my shame? All of those different things, just stopping and being aware of how you are doing. One of the things that I've thought of over the years is part of my job is people come to me, I want recovery, I want to heal. And I have to be, it's like an honest salesman. And it's like, there are wonderful benefits if you begin this journey, if you buy this product, but here's the cost. And I got to be honest about, here's the cost. So let me give you, here's the realities of the recovery journey. So there's wonderful benefits, but there's some other pieces you need to be aware of. So number one, you are choosing to enter a time where you're going to make all kinds of changes in your life, and that's going to take you into the unknown. And our brain doesn't like change in the unknown because that brings about fear that I'm going to get hurt again. This recovery journey is going to push you out of your comfort zone. It's going to stretch you in ways that you've never been stretched before, to the breaking point. This recovery journey is going to include times of failure. You're not going to do everything perfectly. And those failures at times might have some painful consequences. This recovery journey is going to have times of confusion where you're not sure if you're doing the right thing. You can't think in black and white anymore, and so you're confusion. You get one person telling you one thing and another person telling you another. It can be very confusing for you. That's going to lead to times of doubts, self-doubt, times of discouragement after failure, after confusion. Is it worth it? I don't know. And then you're going to have times where you're learning new skills and doing it, and it's going to feel dumb. You're going to feel dumb. It's going to even feel embarrassing to do some of this stuff. And then you're going to find yourself in situations that are messy. Life is not black and white anymore. And so you find yourself in situations and there's not a good option. There's just two bad options. Do I stay in this relationship that's very, very unhealthy for the sake of the kids? But that's going to do damage to the kids. Or do I separate? Well, that's going to do damage to the kids. I don't like either option, but I got to choose between them, and it's messy. Then you're going to have times where people are going to disappoint you. You want everybody to treat you perfectly. Not everybody's going to, so you got to deal with that. And then you're going to have times where you're going to get your hopes up and you're going to have unrealistic expectations without realizing it. And things aren't going to go as well as you thought they were. You're going to be disappointed by your circumstances. And then you're going to have times where things are going to get worse before they get better. So you learn all these new healthy tools, you implement them, and you think, oh, that's going to make my life better, but actually things get worse first before they get better. Then you're going to have times of conflict. And then you're going to have times where old behaviors surface, old wounds surface that you didn't even know were there. You thought they were behind you. You thought you had dealt with that. Now they're back haunting you again. And then you're going to have times where this new life where you're learning all these new tools, it gets boring. It's mundane. You do the same stuff over and over again. It doesn't have the same excitement and chaos and drama of the old life. And sometimes you do all this stuff over and over again, but you don't see any differences. It doesn't seem like it's helping a whole lot, but they just say, keep doing it. Someday you're going to see it. And then part of doing this stuff over and over again, basically what they're saying is, you need to learn deferred gratification. You do the right stuff, but you're not going to get instant gratification. It's not going to come until later. Now you got to sit in this no gratification, deferred to gratification. That's new to you. And then you're going to face many temptations to get off track, to go back to the old life, to go back to old friends, to get into a romantic relationship when you're not ready, to go back to work too soon, to take on too many stresses because you're afraid to say no. Temptation after temptation. So be aware that this is a wonderful journey with tremendous consequences, but there are pitfalls along the way that you are going to be subjected to. Now, let me end with this. I get asked all the time, what modalities do you use in your therapy and your treatment programs? And so modalities are just different psychiatric approaches, different therapies that have been developed over the years to help people. What I have found is this: I don't use just one modality. I use a blend of all the modalities. That to me is so important, because what I have found is one modality, if only it is used, it provides some benefit, but it doesn't get to all of the issues. And so that's why I have to borrow from all the different modalities, because one is usually not enough. Secondly, some modalities work really well at the beginning of the journey. Others work better later in the journey. If I was to try to use some that are good for later in the journey, if I was to use them at the beginning of the journey, it could actually do damage. And so I need to be aware of a bunch of different modalities, when it is best to use them in that person's life. That is such an important part in this journey. So let me very, very quickly give you a summary of some of the modalities that are helpful. Okay, so I talked about cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy. And dialectical is that war in the brain between the limbic brain and the cortex brain that is such an important part of trauma. Then there's EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, where you move your eyes from side to side, guided by a therapist who's trained. This has got all kinds of scientific proof that it is very effective, and many have found it very helpful for them in reprocessing their trauma. Then there's EFT, or emotion freedom techniques, which is known sometimes as tapping. So you tap different pressure points, and it helps release some of the trauma from your body. Then another modality of therapy is internal family systems, developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz. We use it. It's got tremendous benefits for people. Inner child work, psychoanalysis, Gestalt therapy, brain spotting. Now, one of the questions I get asked about more and more is, what about psychedelics? So mushrooms, ayahuasca tea, MDMA. So let me just say this. There is growing research being done in this area. It's still early on, but there's growing evidence that it does have some benefits for some people. But a caution needs to be given, a qualifier. So there's really two things that need to be understood in my mind. Number one, do not go into psychedelics unless you have an experienced, reliable guide, because they can take you to places that are quite dark. And if you don't have a guide to help you, it can be too much. So you need that, number one. Number two, what I have found for many people that have used psychedelics is they have seen instant benefits. But if they don't deal with their deep core issues of shame, of fear of abandonment, they just leave those unlooked at. Those benefits they receive from psychedelics, within a few months, they begin to disappear because their deep core issues take over. And so if you're going to do psychedelics, don't see them as a magic fix. Don't see them as a bypass to dealing with painful stuff. You still have to deal with that deep core stuff. So they can be helpful in doing with that, but they must be done in conjunction with that. Well, that's the healing journey in an overview, in a nutshell. I hope it's helpful for you. I hope it gives you a sense, an accurate picture of what's involved in this. Well, that's the end of our evening.